All right, now in our interview coming up for this show, we're going to be joined here by Chris Nowinski. He's the CEO and co-founder of the Concussion Legacy Foundation up at Boston U, which happens to also be the place that a little less than a year ago I donated my brain to for study, and they have done the cutting edge work when it comes to investigating causes into traumatic brain injury, CTE, and things like that. And joining us right now is Chris Nowinski. Chris, thanks for coming on.
My pleasure, Randy. Thanks for the invitation.
Yeah. Hey, quite a day yesterday for all of you. Could you go over for our listeners a little bit as to what went on with you guys at Concussion Legacy Foundation yesterday?
It was a big day. So at 10 a.m., a new study was released that the foundation provided the seed funding for to investigate, or really to create an animal model of CTE. We'll never really be able to develop treatments or really understand what's happening in CTE without first developing a model for it. And so what Dr. Lee Goldstein and his team, led by Boston University, but it involved over 20 researchers at different universities around on 3 continents, is they were able to recreate essentially mouse CTE with just hitting mice in the head who showed no signs of concussion. So the idea has been that we've never had a model that sort of recreated what like a football head impact is, where you get hit hard, but you're fine. No one can tell anything's wrong with you. So he was able to recreate that model, and what he was essentially able to prove was that concussion signs don't correlate to whether or not you see CT pathology in the brain. And it looks like we've proved that CT can be caused by just simple repetitive hits that don't cause symptoms. And that's what we suspected all along. And that's why we think in our brain bank, 20% of the brains have never had diagnosed concussion. Because if you think about it, for guys like you and me, we've been hit in the head 10,000 times. You unfortunately a little more.
Yeah.
And a couple of those caused any symptoms, but the rest could still be damaging our brain, causing what we're seeing as like early micro bleeds and breakdown of the blood-brain barrier, and what we think are what appears to be the early signs of CT as compared to our human early CT cases. So now that we have that, it's a big step towards establishing that we're not going to solve the CT problem just by focusing on concussions, and we have to stop repetitive hits to the head. And so the next step was at 2 o'clock, and they happen to fall on the same day, but they weren't designed to. The afternoon announcement has been in the work for over a year, but we launched our Flag Football Under 14 campaign.
Mm-hmm.
Essentially, the idea is that if we want to actually, as you know, in July we published that we diagnosed CTE in 110 of the first 111 NFL players we studied, and even 3 of 14 high school players. And all the evidence is showing us that CTE in relationship with head hits is like lung cancer in its relationship with cigarettes. The more cigarettes you smoke, the longer you smoke, the greater your risk. That's what all the evidence is telling us about CT and head hits. And so we said, okay, if that's the case, how do you actually prevent the next generation of football players from developing CTE at an unacceptable rate? And that we decided that the simplest way to do that is to stop hitting kids in the head when they're young.
Yeah, imagine that.
Yeah, who knew? If you want to cut 9 years off someone's career, you can't tell Randy Cross you can't go make money in the NFL as an adult, but you can tell a 5-year-old, hey, this isn't right for you yet. You should wait till your brain is developed far more than it is at 5. And then maybe you can try taking on a risky activity like football. And so, there's a lot of reasons why we went to 14. All that information's at flagfootballu14.org. But we had a press conference with Dr. Robert Cantu, our medical director, Dr. Lee Goldstein, the PI of the study, and then Hall of Famer Nick Buonaconti, Hall of Famer Harry Carson, and Raiders legend Phil Vipiano, all there backing. Hey, football's, adult football is fine, teenage, college is fine, high school, but we shouldn't have kids playing tackle before high school. And if we do that, we actually solve most of the CTE problem.
And Chris, Nick Buonaconti is actually being affected, some cognitive issues related to his football career now, right?
He has dementia.
Okay.
So he's got not only dementia but enormous motor problems. So he's confined mostly to a wheelchair.
Okay.
But he's still, he was a brilliant man in his prime. And so he begged us to come to this press conference. We were worried about the trip being too much for him, but he said, he told his wife, he goes, I refuse to shoot a video to support this campaign. I am coming to the press conference. And he said to parents, I beg you, don't let your kids play tackle football till high school.
Yeah. You and I started talking about this a little bit last year when I was donating my brain, because I didn't start till the 9th grade. And I really see nothing wrong, and not for nothing, but I don't see the value of playing football physically to your body, whether it's a knee or a shoulder or an arm or your brain, of playing football before then.
Yeah, and I'm the same way. I mean, even though I topped out in college, I didn't play until 9th grade, and if you're an athlete, it's a game you pick up very quickly. And I agree. The way I think about it now is it's sort of insane to ask a child to play football the way we played it before they can develop upper body strength. Because I remember like the way I played football as a freshman in high school when I couldn't bench press my own weight, and as a senior in college when I could, and my weight was a lot higher.
Yeah.
You could use your arms to protect your head. If you can't push, you can't protect your head from getting hit when you're blocking. And so I think it's just cruel to ask a child who's got a gigantic head relative to their body. Their head to body ratio would be like you in the NFL with a head 4 times larger. Nobody would think that's a good idea to go try to bank.
It's called a bobblehead.
Right.
Yeah.
It's just that everything is so obviously wrong about youth tackle football is a good idea for a child. I mean, we made the point in the press conference. When you sign your 5-year-old up, they might be 40 pounds, and you're putting a 4-pound helmet on their head and asking them to run around and fall a lot, right? That's the equivalent of when you played. How heavy were you in the NFL?
I got up to about 290.
Can you imagine having a 29-pound helmet on your head and trying to not only hit people, but fall and keep your head from smacking off the ground?
Mm-hmm.
It's insane. It's truly insane.
Hey, it was some of the research that's going on, and I try to keep up as much as I can with a lot of things, especially with, I've got a little bit of more of a personal connection thanks to you and the Concussion Legacy Foundation, donating my brain, but also my old teammate Dwight Clark was diagnosed about 1.5 years ago with ALS, and it's fairly rapid onset ALS. But I've been studying and keeping up with things coming out. Are we starting to see a little bit of not a joining, but things like Parkinson's, ALS, CTE, they're all brain related, obviously. Are there any threads that are starting to come together as to some of these things having a lot of things in common?
Yes, and I think the most relevant one and the one that actually has probably the most research at this point is that connection with ALS. So basically, the idea is trauma can open up a lot of problems. We see some aspects of Alzheimer's, increased beta amyloid plaques in the brains of CT victims, but not the diagnostic criteria for Alzheimer's. So there's common mechanisms and pathways when you start hitting someone in the head that you can create degeneration. But ALS is interesting because Dr. Ann McKee really made that discovery in 2010 when she was looking at NFL players who died of ALS and seeing that they really appeared to have CTE, and sort of an aggressive type of CTE that affected areas that were in control of your motor systems, and they would create ALS symptoms. And so they call it basically like CTE-motor neuron disease. And since she made that discovery in 2010, published it, we've identified, well over a dozen more cases where, and the great thing about having Dr. Ann McKee leading this is she also runs the VA's National ALS Brain Bank. So basically, when you think of ALS, it's a clinical syndrome that there's a lot of ways to get to.
Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of environmental exposures, genetic exposures that can get you to that. So she identified that trauma appears to be a way that you can get to ALS clinically. And then what was been interesting is since then, there's a study published on Monday that used brain bank tissue from our brain bank, and the doctor established that the ALS and CTE tau have a common pathway. So he basically created a mouse model for CT and ALS. And so it's very complex. I won't explain the details here, but that it's becoming clearer and clearer that CT and ALS are linked and if you've had head trauma in some cases, and that it's probably why NFL players, as we know today, have been diagnosed with ALS at 4 times higher rates than the normal population.
Wow, that's something. Hey, I can't have you on without also getting back sort of around towards concussions and head injuries. You've been extremely active social media wise around specifically the NFL and some of the concussion things that we've seen, their so-called concussion protocol, which my involvement now football wise has been much more over on the college side. College football does a significantly better job of not only teaching things that have to be done, changing tackling techniques, blocking techniques, and whatnot, but also the way they manage, it seems, the protocol within the game. What's your general impression of what the NFL has been doing and what they should be doing from a protocol standpoint?
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure that I would say that college is better than the NFL.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a lot less scrutiny on college, and I think teams get away with a lot when I watch games because the kids are a little more faceless and no one's really paying attention to whether or not they're going back in when they shouldn't. But that being said, it's been a very interesting year for me with.
Well, I will say, Chris, in college, they will take a player off the field into the locker room and check them out. Almost, in my experience, nearly 100% of the time when it's something fairly obvious, where you can't say that in the NFL.
No, and the flaw in the protocols, the design in the NFL is that you don't actually have to take them to the locker room most of the time, right? So the NFL's created a protocol situation where they have their new tents. They love their blue tents.
The pop-up.
Yep.
Yep.
And unless you exhibit some egregious signs of concussion, which are rare, like being knocked out, or now they had to change it mid-season. Now falling over when you get up, or showing the fencing posture, which means you have a brainstem injury and your arm sticks straight out when you're unconscious. You don't show those. You don't necessarily have to go to the locker room, and they do a really cursory 3-minute exam in the tent that's going to let most things go by, and that's the choice that they've made. And it's letting a lot of people get back into the game who are diagnosed after the game with a concussion. So the NFL has sort of made a decision that it doesn't want a conservative protocol, and that might be a decision that's by the players and the league.
Mm-hmm.
But what we have right now is not a gold standard. It's not something that should be matched by kids. It's not something that should be matched at the high school level. And I've made a lot of awareness about it because I occasionally watch games on Sunday, and I just happen to catch a lot of the worst concussions where guys had clear signs, should not have gone back in, but somehow the protocol failed and they went back in, and I call it out on Twitter, and suddenly I've got 5,000 retweets, and there's media articles are quoting my Twitter saying that they need to investigate the hits. So it's an interesting use of social media to police the NFL's protocol, but it's been incredibly valuable in actually getting them to change their protocol week 15, which is unprecedented.
Yeah, well, it's a credit to you and a credit to a lot of the people out there that are doing a lot of this research and being so aggressive and proactive about bringing this information to the public. Really want to personally thank you, and on behalf of a lot of people, thank you for the work that you've done.
Well, thank you. And the fans, it's fascinating to see how tuned in the fans now are when they get angry that their star player is going back in when it shouldn't, because, we're all human beings and we don't want to watch someone suffer unnecessarily. So I think that message will get to the NFL too, that the fans don't want to see their players suffer unnecessarily.
Yeah. Every time I tweet something about these situations, I always put a little hashtag, cue the meatheads. Because following up that kind of a tweet about concussion is, well, don't we just put dresses on them? Or, they're just playing football. It's like, well, not anymore.
No, and it's cool to see that so many people actually stand up to those people now and say, these are human beings and it doesn't have to be this way. And, you go do that and then get improper medical care and see how you feel.
All right. So again, it's concussionfoundation.org. is the website, and also for flag football, u14.org.
Yes, sir.
All righty. That's the places to go. He's Chris Nowinski with Concussion Legacy Foundation. They've been doing all the great work research-wise. He's the CEO and co-founder. And Chris, thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Randy, and thanks again for your brain, but you make sure to take good care of it. We don't want it anytime soon.
I've got no intention of handing that sucker over in a long time. Thanks, Chris.
All right, thanks.
All right, man. Bye-bye.
How you doing when it's time?